well. Now, I don't deem myself as a pastor that watches over a flock. I believe in the fivefold ministry that's like super deep in the spiritual side of things. I believe there are some that are pastors, there are some that are apostles, evangelists, there are some that are teachers, and I can't forget the last one. But either the whole pastor one is someone that watches over the flock, like that tends to the sheep, that is the person that a lot of times in westernized culture we think a pastor is the person that's just preaching.
Yeah.
No, like a pastor in the like fivefold ministry, the real terminology of pastor is supposed to be the person that the flock can call on for leadership, or if they're sick, or if they want to get married and they need
So
counseling.
they take like they do house calls, and they're like, you can call them and
They're
say,
the pastor that cares about most people that have like the actual gift of pastor. You think of it as a shepherd, like it's synonymous in the Bible where it talks about shepherd and sheep. Like when you think of a shepherd back in the Bible days, like in sheep, like shepherds watched over the sheep. Like, and every time one would veer away, they not, like if they saw a wolf, they would, fight the wolf, so they were very protective of their sheep. So that is what the Bible usually, parallels to what a pastor truly is someone that does that. Today's pastors really don't subscribe to that.
I mean, no, like
they be preaching.
They just preach.
They be preaching.
Wow.
Yeah, but then a lot of the more mega churches, which is a lot of what I've done with a lot of small churches, but I've also done a ton with mega churches as well, like huge churches, 20,000 member churches,
Okay. Yeah.
And those types of churches typically have more staff, that you have pastoral staff, and that's usually what I've sat on. And because my background is more musical, I've usually sat on as a worship pastor or a creative pastor. And because of my years, I've done this for over 20 years. So because of my years in understanding like organizational communications, business, and things like that, because of my degrees, I've also sat as like an executive pastor. So coming in and doing systems and structures. I still care for people. I still touch people, but it's more on an administrative side or more on the musical creative side.
Music was always my favorite part of church.
Yeah.
It was always the part that I'm like, okay, I can get into the music. The music was most touching because I felt like the sermons were scary. As growing up as a child, it was just for God to love us so much, they invoked a lot of fear.
Yeah, yeah.
And as a child, I could not get with it.
A lot of people couldn't. I couldn't for real, but I was forced to because I am a pastor's kid. Like, I had to sit and hear, it's holiness or hell. I'm like, oh, what's
it was scary.
Like, I was definitely afraid. So a lot of my upbringing was pretty, like, a lot of people talk about pastors' kids either being crazy, like, like wild, the worst ones, or the ones that are trying to be perfect. I lean more towards trying to be perfect because I really did want to please my family, but I also wanted to please God. And so hearing those stories of holiness or hell, it made things so super rigid for me that I didn't feel freedom to do anything. Everything about my relationship with God was fear-based. It was definitely like out of being afraid if I was going to wake up and just see my parents' clothes on the floor because the rapture then took place. Like I was definitely afraid, and I didn't see God as a loving God. I saw God as a judging God, even though they say that like like he's a loving God, he's grace. I didn't even want to use grace because I was just like afraid that I was going to miss it somehow and I was going to end up on the fast track to hell. And so, I was one of those pastor's kids that stayed on the straight and narrow. So when you say about the worship being your favorite part, that's why I loved it so much. Of course, I'm musically inclined, always have been. The music in the Bible, it talks about he inhabits the praises of his people, like he dwells there. So that's where I feel God the most. He dances while we sing, to him. And that's to me, that's like the most romantic, like love story that can ever be written. Like if I'm thinking about a God that I'm thinking is so big and sovereign, that's the softest I ever experienced him.
Yeah,
so I love that. So even in my professional career, I try to make sure when I go into churches, like the three things that I think about is the word, of course, like what are we feeding people, but the worship is just as important because typically in most of these churches, worship is like at least almost 50% of the church service.
Yeah.
And then the world. So what is your media presentation? What are you presenting to the world? So those are like the three pillars of today's church structure.
And so that is kind of like a triple threat. You're a songwriter, a singer, a pastor, and a media maven, right? So to speak, like for these churches. And has it always been in the church, or have you done it for other brands?
I've done it for other brands too. Like as far as like of course that's where my roots are.
Yeah.
That's where I got a lot of my, so I believe, like I wish church could kind of go back to what it used to be, because like
what did it used to be?
It was more servant. Like of course I was still forced because my daddy made me.
Yeah.
but a lot of time, like you it was a sense of serving, like of like singing was something I wanted to do, you know? So I never looked at it as work until I got older and realized like I'm spending over 40 hours doing this. This is work, you know? But I got a lot of my foundational skills from being in the church world. I got a lot of like the tenacity, community, structure. I learned like the first events that I planned, or you know, that I creative directed before I got to a conference that I was helping to creative direct that's like 40,000 people. Like I did it at my dad's small church. So I got a lot. It was like training wheels for me. I didn't even know that I was getting prepared to do big things, but it started at the church. It started there, like learning how to serve. I was the one that had to straighten up the chairs and vacuum the church, clean the toilets.
Because you were the preacher's
I was the preacher's
daughter.
kid. I was his kid. So I'm the one that is...
You were closing the doors of the church.
Opening them up and closing them, picking up the donuts for Sunday school. Like I had to do so much that even throughout college, I didn't even go out of state to college. Even though I got, you know, accepted to different colleges, I stayed in my state, in my city, because I still wanted to serve at my church. So I was a full-time student. I was working full-time at a marketing firm. But then I was also a cheerleader in college, and I still was serving at every service at my dad's church.
I feel like there's so much to unpack there with that, because speaking of preacher's kid, and like you said, it's like there's two paths you go. I always like the preacher's kids, and like, 'cause I went to a 7-day Adventist school, a little bit in elementary and then a little bit in high school. And then my sister went to the college. But it was like the preacher's kids were like the wildest ones. From what I saw. And it's like, but you said there's either or. You can either be completely wild, or you can just stick like to the book.
Yeah, because those of the ones that end up being completely wild, I totally understand that path too, because I'm kind of on that path now as like as an adult. It's kind of like where you want to finally just break free.